Gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Clinton, I apologize. My line of questioning will probably be a little bit boring because I'm going to get into some details that actually have to deal with security and how we can better safeguard America's diplomats now and onwards. I have to say that the ARB conducted by Admiral Mullen, a man of great military pedigree and long service to this nation, quite honorable, brave service, as well as Ambassador Pickering, I thought was well conducted and well thought out. And in fact, don't just take my word from it, I'm a pretty low-ranking member of the House, but Buck McKeon, the Republican chairman, longtime Republican chairman of the House Armed Services Committee also, and never once in our committee hearing did I hear him malign the work that was done in that ARB, as we on that committee also looked into what happened. So I want to look at some of the findings from that ARB, and I want specifically to examine the failures of the Blue Mountain Libya security guards and the February 13 militia on that exact day, September 11th, 2012. My understanding is in Benghazi, neither the host country's militia forces nor the State Department's private local guards were capable of defending our personnel. These poorly trained forces either did not show up, they retreated in the face of danger, or simply lacked the necessary tools to fight back effectively. I want to learn the lessons from Benghazi and hold everyone accountable, not just the State Department, but every agency involved, as well as Congress ourselves and this committee itself, for implementing significant comprehensive reforms that will prevent future tragedies.
Did you personally review our security situation as the previous ARB required?
Looking at the work that I've done on Armed Services Committee and on oversight government reform, I've been consistently concerned with the cost and consequences of federal contract mismanagement. Costs the American taxpayers a lot of dollars. So I want to look at the State Department's policy of awarding local guard contracts using a very inflexible contract vehicle known as the lowest price technically acceptable, or LPTA, vehicle. I think that should have raised red flags here in Congress.
What are you babbling about?
When life and limb are at risk, such as when buying body armor for our troops overseas or barriers for our embassies, I don't know that acceptable is the right vehicle. So can you discuss a little bit why is it that the State Department appears to have awarded local guard contracts in Libya using this contracting method?
Congresswoman, I think that's another very important question.
I didn't do it.
I think the State Department, like much of the rest of the government, often feels under pressure to go to the lowest price, whether or not that lowest price is the best contract. And we had a lot of challenges, not just in Libya, but in many places around the world. Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision. Trying to work to find the right contractors to provide static security for a lot of our posts and facilities, to find more kinetic contractors who could be the front line of defense, since we, as we discussed earlier, were stationed in so many places where there were not American military that could be called and quickly respond. So I would like very much, and perhaps there could be a working group with Armed Services and Foreign Affairs and others to look to see whether we couldn't get a little more flexibility into this decision-making, because the February 17th militia was viewed by the CIA, which had vetted it, as well as by our diplomats, as a reliable source for kinetic support. Sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision. And the static support proved to be not very useful at all on that night. So premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision. I think you're really raising an important issue about how to get more flexibility into the contracting, because we're not going to be able to bring American military forces to every place where we are in a high threat post, either because the military can't afford to do that for us or because the host country won't invite us in. And the other problem, as you pointed out, is that if the host country doesn't have any real resources, it's hard to know how much they can produce. That night I was calling the president of Libya and demanding that he find any friendly militia, any friendly anybody, to show up and to support us. When our reinforcements, the security reinforcements from Tripoli landed, a militia showed up and in fact kept them there until they had a big enough group to accompany them to the CIA annex. So it's a very unpredictable and even erratic process. And it starts with premises that were vulnerable and threatened. Of course they came to me. I had to make the decision. In many instances, the lowest price. And I don't think that's always the best way to get a contract for security.
I happen to agree with you, and I think actually the LPTA that I'm talking about that actually sets very inflexible standards for specifically the Department of State is actually a law passed by Congress in 1990. So when you talk about maybe some sort of a working group, Congress needs to do our part and maybe amend a 35-year-old law that actually forced the State Department to go with the lowest price.
I didn't do it.
Secretary Clinton, can you address what actions Congress can fix problems that have to do with host country instituted stringent policies given the use of private security guards? My understanding is that the country of Libya, the host nation in this case, did not allow your security contractors to carry firearms. The Blue Mountain Guards, I think the Blue Mountain Guards were not allowed to carry firearms.
Right.
Is that right?
Yeah, the Blue Mountain was not. Certainly our diplomatic security officers were. The militia members who were supposed to be providing kinetic help for us were. So it was only the static guards that were not. Now, I will say that, you know, some of those guards did stand their ground. They were basically run over. Several of them were injured the night of the attack. So I don't want to cast aspersions on all of them and the service they provided, but it was not adequate. Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision for what we needed then or really at any time.
I didn't do it.
Are we facing that same type of restrictions in other nations as well, in other hotspots? We talked earlier about the 19 missions that are out there. With this type of issues with the LPTA and contracting and as well as host nation requirements?
Yes, we do. You know, the host nation gets to call a lot of the shots. Under the Vienna Convention, the host nation is responsible for providing security for diplomatic posts.
I didn't do it.
But when a host nation is either unwilling to do so, as we do have in some places where we are present, or unable to do so, because I do think with the Libyans, there was a desire to be helpful, but not a capacity to produce what we needed. We have to really work hard to get the kind of support that is required. And premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision. You know, in some cases, we've been able to work out arrangements with the host country. Some we have just defied them and tried to be very quiet about what we were doing, and others, you know, we are prohibited. So it's a constant, again, it goes back to that balancing of risk and reward that we're always doing.
Going back to the ARB conducted by Admiral Mullins and Ambassador Pickering, how many of their recommendations did U.S. Secretary of State accept?
I accepted all of them.
Did you personally review our security situation as the previous ARB required?
They made 29 recommendations, Congresswoman. I accepted all 29 of them and began to implement them before I left the State Department, and I know that Secretary Kerry has continued that work.
Did you personally review our security situation as the previous ARB required?
Do you recommend for future secretaries and for this committee and other members of Congress some sort of a formal review process as we go onwards? I don't want there to be a review process that is triggered by death of Americans. This goes back to my earlier question about institutionalization of this process so that we make sure that our men and women in embassies right now are safe and that they're safe tomorrow and a year from now and 10 years from now. What needs to be done so that we can make sure that our 4 heroic dead did not lay down their lives in vain?
Did you personally review our security situation as the previous ARB required?
Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision. Well, Congresswoman, before the attacks in Benghazi, the Congress never fully funded the security requests that the administration sent to Congress.
I didn't do it.
Following Benghazi, that has improved, but there are still areas where I think greater funding and responsiveness would be helpful. It was unfortunate that we didn't get all the resources that might have enabled us to do more in all the high-threat posts. Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision before Benghazi, but I appreciate what the Congress has done since. The one specific recommendation that I would like to see the Congress act on expeditiously is the training facility that would be set up in order to train diplomatic security officers specifically for these high-threat situations. And I think this is overdue. I know that on a bipartisan basis, representatives from Virginia, which is the state where the site that has been identified is found, have urged in a recent op-ed that the Congress act on this. I would certainly echo that as well.
Thank you.
What are you babbling about? Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision. Premises that were vulnerable and threatened, of course they came to me. I had to make the decision.